Cameras hummed like insects under the House gallery lights, catching the shine of brass rails and the tense choreography of a chamber pretending to be calm. Staffers lined the back wall with iPads raised, knowing something volatile was about to happen. It started small. AOC stepped to the mic with that measured stillness she uses when she's about to throw lightning. "Mr. Speaker," she said, "we cannot govern by meme, by outrage, or by fear." Her voice didn't climb, it settled, steady as a gavel. JD Vance, seated 2 rows back as a guest for a joint address rehearsal, smirked as if he'd been waiting for the cue. He rose, asked unanimous consent to respond, and the room itself seemed to lean in. This wasn't cable news theater, it felt older, heavier, marble, precedent, reputation. AOC held up a thin sheaf of pages. Senator Vance calls working families pampered when they ask for childcare. Calls frontline teachers politicized when they ask for books that tell the truth. If facts make you uncomfortable, that isn't indoctrination, that's accountability. Gasps flickered across the chamber like static. Vance stepped to the well, jacket unbuttoned, chin set. "Congresswoman, what you call accountability is just moral vanity with better branding. America needs grit, not grievance." Phones went up. The C-SPAN ticker crawled faster, as if even fonts could panic. AOC didn't blink. Grit is a nurse doing double shifts, not a senator doing double standards. The line punched a hole in the air. Vance smiled, too narrowly. "Then let's test your standards, Congresswoman. Are you willing to say, here and now, that safety, energy, and borders matter more than trending hashtags?" The chamber rippled. She half-turned to the board behind her and tapped a statistic: overdose deaths by county, child poverty spikes mapped in red. Hashtags didn't create these numbers. Policy did. Yours. The speaker's gavel hovered, undecided. Reporters mouthed wow. It wasn't a speech anymore. It was a fuse burning toward something neither side could afford to lose. JD Vance didn't back down. He leaned into the mic with that courtroom cadence he loves to weaponize. "Congresswoman," he said, "you parade statistics like trophies, but real America doesn't live on your charts. They live in broken towns, gutted by elites who think every crisis can be solved by hashtags and hearings. You're fluent in outrage, not solutions." His words hung heavy, engineered to sting, to frame her as all theater and no substance. Some Republicans smirked, others nodded, while Democrats exchanged glances that said here we go. AOC didn't flinch. Her eyes tracked him the way a lit fuse tracks toward gunpowder. "Broken towns," she repeated, her voice low but cutting. "You're right, Senator. They are broken, by corporate greed that you called free market. By opioids pushed into Appalachia while you collected book deals about the people you left behind. Don't tell me about broken towns. I've walked them. I've taught in them." The chamber rustled, even opponents knew she had landed a direct hit. Vance raised his chin, smirk sharpening into defiance. "And yet you fly back to New York every night, safe in a bubble of latte liberals who've never set foot in Appalachia." AOC lifted her hand, a single finger tapping the mic. "Safe? I've been doxxed, threatened, stalked, because I dared to say working people deserve healthcare and dignity. That's not a bubble. That's a target." The words cracked through the chamber, slicing the smugness off Vance's face. The speaker finally pounded the gavel. "Order. Order in the chamber." But the tension didn't cool. It thickened. Phones in the gallery vibrated non-stop, hashtags already forming mid-sentence, hashtag Vance vs AOC, hashtag Broken Towns, hashtag Target Not Bubble. The drama was no longer contained in the House, it was spilling into the bloodstream of the internet, and both of them knew it. The chamber's atmosphere felt less like Congress and more like an arena, every cough and shuffle amplified by the anticipation of another blow. Reporters in the press gallery scribbled furiously, their pens scratching like sparks against dry wood. AOC leaned on the podium just enough to look unshaken, almost conversational. "Senator Vance," she began, "you call yourself the voice of forgotten America. But every time working people demand healthcare, you call it socialism. Every time women ask for autonomy, you call it extremism. Every time a young person calls for climate action, you call it hysteria. That's not advocacy, that's dismissal dressed up as tough talk. The word struck with surgical calm, each phrase paced, letting silence do half the damage. Vance's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, hands spread in mock openness. Dismissal, he shot back. I'm talking about priorities. This country can't function if its leaders are more focused on pronouns than paychecks. You've built your brand on fighting ghosts while families can't even afford groceries. The Republicans in the chamber clapped, too quickly, too rehearsed, like they needed the sound more than the substance. AOC paused. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't amusement but calculation. Groceries, she said softly, almost to herself. Then louder, let's talk about groceries. While you rail against pronouns, billion-dollar corporations raise prices 3 times faster than inflation. Families aren't broke because of pronouns. They're broke because your donors turned bread into a luxury. Gasps scattered like dropped marbles. One Democrat whispered, "That's the clip." And indeed, cameras zoomed, capturing the exact moment JD Vance's smirk cracked into something closer to irritation. He pointed a finger toward her. "You're grandstanding, Congresswoman. Always have been." AOC tilted her head, voice calm but laced with steel. "If naming the problem is grandstanding, then maybe your silence has been complicity." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the silence of people realizing history was shifting under their feet. The speaker's gavel came down again, but even his voice couldn't smother the tension unraveling across the chamber. The press row lit up, phones buzzing, tweets firing into the digital bloodstream. AOC straightened, her presence radiating not just defiance but composure, a deliberate refusal to shrink under the glare. "Senator," she said, her tone steady as stone, "you keep confusing volume with vision. Yelling about culture wars won't put a single meal on the table, won't rebuild a single town, won't bring back a single factory job. What it does is distract." JD Vance's lips curved into a half-smile, the kind meant to dismiss rather than engage. He raised his voice just enough to command the chamber. "And what you're doing right now isn't distraction. You thrive on outrage. You turn every disagreement into some grand moral trial. This country doesn't need saviors in designer shoes. It needs discipline." A ripple moved through the room, a mix of laughter and murmurs. Some Republicans chuckled, others leaned back smugly, certain he had landed the blow. But AOC didn't move. Instead, she slowly turned toward him, lowering her voice until the room leaned in to catch every syllable. "Discipline?" she echoed. "Discipline is a mother in Ohio working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on while your party cuts taxes for billionaires. Discipline is a teacher in the Bronx buying pencils for her students out of her own paycheck while you call them indoctrinators. Don't talk to me about discipline. I've seen it. I live it. And I refuse to let you redefine it as obedience to power." The words didn't just echo, they sank. Reporters typed furiously, staffers exchanged glances, and the speaker let the silence linger, knowing to gavel now would be to look like he was covering for someone. JD Vance's face flushed, caught between indignation and the need to claw back control. He leaned in, finger jabbing the air. "So you're the authority now, the moral compass of America?" AOC didn't blink. "Not the compass," she replied, voice sharp, unwavering. "Just the mirror. If you don't like the reflection, that's not my fault." The chamber exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. And outside, in the feeds and timelines, the clip was already viral. The chamber had shifted into a theater of silences, every pause more deafening than applause, every glance carrying weight. JD Vance adjusted his tie, clearly stung but unwilling to concede ground. "Congresswoman," he said, his voice now colder, clipped, "mirrors don't fix broken homes. They don't balance budgets. They don't defend borders. All you do is perform." The words were meant to slice, but they carried the hollow sound of a line rehearsed too many times. AOC didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the mic, lowering her shoulders like a fighter settling into stance. "Perform," she said quietly, almost conversationally. You know what performance looks like? It's standing in front of cameras pretending to care about working families while voting against every bill that would raise their wages. It's lecturing America about family values while stripping healthcare from the very families you claim to defend. If this is performance, Senator, then you've turned hypocrisy into an art form. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Some Republicans groaned audibly, Democrats leaned forward, their faces lit with anticipation. Vance tightened his jaw, clinging to the smirk that no longer fit. He snapped back, "You call me a hypocrite while you jet around with Hollywood celebrities, soaking up applause. You've built a brand, not a legacy." This time, AOC didn't just respond with words, she let the silence hold, forcing the room to hang on her next breath. Then she said, deliberate and sharp, "A legacy isn't built on applause. It's built on whether people's lives are better because you were here. So I'll ask you, Senator, what lives are better because of your votes?" The question landed like a hammer. The chamber stilled, even the speaker froze mid-motion, as though he, too, wanted the answer. JD Vance blinked, once, twice, his mouth half opening, but the words didn't come fast enough. Phones in the gallery caught every second of hesitation, every flicker of discomfort. It was no longer just debate. It was exposure. The silence after AOC's question didn't fade, it deepened. Reporters in the press gallery were already typing furiously, captions ready, "What lives are better because of your votes?" The question would replay on loop before the night was over. JD Vance's smirk faltered into something rawer, unease. He tried to recover, clearing his throat. "Congresswoman, my votes defend taxpayers. They defend freedom. They defend the Constitution." But the words felt prepackaged, hollow. AOC didn't give him time to retreat behind slogans. "Freedom," she said, her tone slicing like glass. "Tell that to the veterans who can't afford their prescriptions because you blocked healthcare expansions. Tell it to the single moms who work 2 jobs and still can't cover rent because you opposed child tax credits. Tell it to the students drowning in debt because you fought against relief." She leaned closer, her voice steady but fierce. "Freedom without dignity isn't freedom, it's a talking point." The chamber shifted, like a crowd realizing the show had become something else entirely. Vance straightened, fists tightening on the desk before him. "This is exactly what I mean," he fired back. "Emotional appeals, cherry-picked stories, not serious policy. You thrive on outrage because outrage pays your bills." AOC didn't miss a beat. "Outrage?" she echoed. "No, Senator. Outrage is a luxury. What I have is responsibility, the responsibility to remind this chamber that real people live with the consequences of your votes. You think this is theater? Then maybe it's because you've forgotten that in a democracy, the people are the audience, and they're not applauding you." Her words detonated in the air. The chamber didn't roar, it inhaled, sharply, like it had just witnessed a cut no one could bandage. Even lawmakers usually loyal to Vance looked down at their notes, unwilling to meet his eyes. Across America, clips would soon explode across social media, captioned with one line, "Freedom without dignity isn't freedom." And JD Vance knew it. For the first time, his expression cracked, not in anger, but in recognition. This wasn't just a clash. It was the kind of moment that could etch itself into political memory. The air thickened as the exchange escalated. Cameras zoomed tighter, catching every twitch of Vance's jaw, every flicker in AOC's eyes. For viewers at home, it was no longer just politics, it was confrontation distilled into something raw and human. The moderator tried to interject, gavel tapping like nervous applause, but the chamber had already decided, this was no longer his stage. Vance leaned forward, voice sharpened to a blade. "You love playing the moral savior, but tell me, how many bills have you passed that actually help the working class you claim to defend? Where are your victories, Congresswoman? Or is the performance itself the point?" Gasps rippled across the room. It was a direct strike, one that pundits had whispered for years but rarely said aloud. AOC, however, didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, and it wasn't rehearsed, it was the calm smile of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this. Victories, she repeated softly, letting the word echo. Every single person who walked into this capital with no voice and saw someone finally speaking their truth, that's a victory. Every time a billionaire lobbyist realizes they don't own this chamber, that's a victory. And tonight, Senator, the fact that you're so rattled by a woman from the Bronx, that's the biggest victory of all. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in an unmistakable shift of energy, the kind that makes people lean forward and whisper, "Did you hear that?" Vance's face flushed, red blooming across his cheekbones. He raised his hand as if to cut her off, but she was already driving forward. Power isn't just about passing bills. It's about shifting the ground under the feet of those who think they own it. And if my words tonight made even one young woman believe she belongs in this chamber, then I've done more than you could ever imagine. Phones lit up instantly. Hashtags began to trend before the debate even ended, hashtag victory redefined and hashtag rattled by the Bronx. Commentators would soon argue whether AOC had gone too far or just far enough, but in that chamber, in that moment, there was no argument, only the undeniable feeling that something irreversible had been said. By now, the confrontation had outgrown the chamber. News tickers blared across the nation, AOC versus Vance, sparks fly on House floor. Social media feeds were flooded with clips, each angle dissected, each phrase turned into a weapon or a rallying cry. The debate wasn't just a policy dispute anymore, it was a referendum on truth, authenticity, and who had the courage to own the stage when the lights burned hottest. Vance, refusing to yield, pushed back with venom in his tone. You call yourself authentic? You're a product of social media, a curated persona who thrives on soundbites. Without Twitter, you'd be invisible. Real leaders don't chase trends, they build legacies. And legacy isn't built on hashtags. His words cracked like a whip, and for a heartbeat, it seemed he had regained control. But AOC countered with precision. Her voice dropped lower, calmer, and that stillness carried more weight than shouting ever could. Senator, history doesn't remember who shouted loudest in this chamber. It remembers who shifted the course of conversation when everyone else was too afraid. Legacies aren't written in marble, they're written in people's lives. And if you think platforms don't matter, tell that to the millions of Americans who never had a voice until technology gave them one. The silence that followed was deafening. For once, Vance hesitated, his hand tightening around his notes as though searching for a line to rescue him. But AOC wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her words slicing through the chamber. You speak of legacy, but the only legacy fear creates is silence. I refuse to let silence win. The chamber shook, not with literal noise, but with the awareness that they had just witnessed a moment destined for history books. Staffers in the gallery scribbled furiously, journalists whispered into their phones, and across the country, families watching from their living rooms leaned closer to their screens. The duel wasn't about who won the argument. It was about who owned the narrative, and tonight, that crown was slipping from Vance's head and settling firmly on AOC's. By the 9th round of their verbal sparring, the atmosphere in the chamber felt electric, almost combustible. Every word landed like a stone cast into a pond, the ripples racing outward into the nation beyond those marble walls. This wasn't just political theater anymore, it had become a test of endurance, intellect, and sheer willpower. JD Vance, visibly unsettled, tried to pivot to safer ground. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and forced a measured tone. Congresswoman, while you perform for cameras, I'm focused on the real struggles of families back home. They don't need slogans, they need jobs. They don't need theatrics, they need stability. That's the work I'm doing, far from the spotlight you seem to crave. He leaned back, satisfied with the sharpness of his rebuttal. But AOC's eyes flashed, and she delivered her counterstrike with precision. Senator, the families you speak of, they are watching. They're watching you dismiss the struggles of those living paycheck to paycheck, pretending their pain is less real because it doesn't fit neatly into your talking points. Jobs? Stability? They can't survive on empty promises. And if you think speaking their truth is theatrics, maybe the problem isn't my message, it's your refusal to hear it. The chamber rumbled with gasps and murmurs. Even some of Vance's allies glanced away, uncomfortable with the clarity of her words. AOC pressed on, her voice unwavering. Theatrics would be ignoring them. Silence would be betrayal. And the day I trade truth for comfort, or people for power, that's the day I don't deserve to stand here. Her words didn't just hang in the air, they ignited it. A wave of applause erupted from the gallery, cutting through the formality of the house. The moderator's gavel pounded desperately, but even he couldn't suppress the raw energy flooding the room. Vance's jaw tightened. For the first time, he seemed not like a challenger, but like a man cornered by the weight of his own arguments. Online, the clash was already legend. Memes sprang to life within minutes, but beyond the humor, there was something heavier, a sense that Washington had just witnessed a shift in the balance of power. The narrative was no longer about left versus right, it was about courage versus calculation. And tonight, courage was winning. The final moments of the confrontation felt less like politics and more like a reckoning. Every camera, every phone, every pair of eyes in the chamber was locked onto the two figures at the center of it all. Vance, cornered but defiant, tried one last desperate thrust. Congresswoman, you can win applause here, but history won't remember hashtags. It remembers those who had the courage to govern, not grandstand. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the strain of the night. AOC let the silence linger, silence that stretched like a taut string across the chamber. And then, with a calmness that cut sharper than anger, she delivered the closing line that would dominate headlines for days. History doesn't remember those who played it safe, Senator. It remembers those who told the truth when it was hardest to hear. The room froze. For a breathless instant, it felt as if time itself held still. And then the chamber erupted, applause, cheers, and gasps crashing together into a wave that drowned out the gavel's frantic pounding. Even those who disagreed with her felt the power of the words, the undeniable sense that they had just witnessed something seismic. Vance sank into his chair, his shoulders heavy, eyes fixed on the table as if searching for refuge. AOC, on the other hand, didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood tall, radiating the quiet strength of someone who knew the fight wasn't about her, but about the people whose stories had been silenced for too long. Within minutes, clips of her words spread across every platform, racking up millions of views. Hashtags like #TruthWhenItHurts and #HistoryRemembers trended globally. Late-night shows replayed the exchange on loop, analysts debated its impact, and commentators, both allies and critics, agreed on one thing: this was a turning point. In the days that followed, op-eds framed the clash as more than a fiery debate. It was the crystallization of two visions of America, one clinging to the safety of old narratives, the other daring to speak truths too long avoided. And in that collision, Washington itself seemed to tremble. The legacy of the night was clear. AOC hadn't just won an argument, she had redefined the battlefield. For years to come, people would recall the moment she stood on the House floor, unflinching, and spoke the words that turned silence into fire. And though JD Vance would continue his career, this night, this clash, would forever remain the scar, and the spotlight, etched into his record. Tonight, we didn't just witness a debate, we witnessed a clash of visions, raw and unfiltered. AOC's words weren't about winning applause, they were about igniting something larger than politics. JD Vance may have stood his ground, but history will remember the moment when silence was broken and truth took center stage. Whether you agree or disagree, one thing is undeniable: Washington won't be the same after this night. And neither will the people who watched it unfold.